Welcome everyone to the Answers on Video series. I'm Axel Threlfall. 2016 was a terrible year for free trade. In June, the British voted, of course, to leave the European Union, where 44% or £240 billion worth of UK exports are currently sent tariff-free. And in November, Donald Trump won the US presidency, in part by attacking the forces of globalization, which he claimed had enriched elites but left millions of American workers in poverty. To put this in perspective, Trump was the first candidate for either of the main US parties since 1928 seeking to advocate protectionism. This discussion couldn't be more timely. Earlier this week, the US Department for Commerce proposed tariffs of up to 219% on US imports of Bombardier's newest passenger jet, putting thousands of jobs at risk in Canada and the UK. Bombardier's US competitor Boeing has alleged that Bombardier was able to sell the aircraft at below cost because of government subsidies. To discuss these and other issues, I'm here in London today with a distinguished panel. Professor Jim Rollo, Deputy Director at the UK Trade Policy Observatory and Fellow of Chatham House. Gary Campkin, Director, Policy and Strategy from the CityUK, the policy group that champions the British financial and professional services industry. And Alex Gorrie from Thomson Reuters Global Trade Team. Why should we be in favour of free trade? A lot of people, let's face it, voted for a package that rejected it. Does it benefit working people?
It benefits some working people, and it may damage other working people. There are always losers from trade liberalisation as well as winners. And often the losers lose quite a lot and the winners win not very much, though there are many more in number. So just talking about the net benefits of trade liberalisation, and I prefer that term to free trade because free trade's a very ambiguous statement. It depends who's saying it and what they're talking about at the time.
What does this sort of anti-trade liberalisation movement mean to you, suggest to you?
It suggests to me that to some extent we've reached a limit on at least the rhetoric to which governments can use in this context and can't take for granted that they've got the permission of the electorate to continue the trend in trade liberalisation that's gone on now basically since 1950. So it's a long-term trend. And even if you look back over the last 10 years, there's still been a very significant movement in trade volumes over that time, and in the way in which other countries are joining in the trade game.
Sure. Gary, let's bring you in here. You of course, represent the financial services lobby. Why is free trade, in your words, desirable for your lot?
Well, for financial and related professional services, it's not just services themselves, it's the customers and clients that the industry services. So for the economy as a whole, it's really important to look at freeing markets. That brings more trade. I mean, between 1990 and 2014, world trade increased 5 times. Global income over the same period increased 2.5 times. So the link is there, the causal link is there. And it's about consumer and customer choice. It's about being able to get the products that you want more effectively. And it's about really ensuring that incomes grow, specializations grow, and as the world economy grows, making sure that everybody benefits. And I think to come back to the issue of the balance of advantage point, balance of advantage is that in free trade, you come out in the round ahead. But you do need to ensure that measures are put in place to help those people who don't get some of the benefits, and that their so-called flanking measures are really important.
Yeah. Has your industry ever been more fearful than they are now?
I don't recognise the word fearful. I don't think we're fearful. I think what the industry is all about is looking at global trends, looking at the future, and for the UK, looking to a post-Brexit future, one of the big areas that we need to look at is making sure that we can capitalise on the opportunities of trade liberalisation, and that will really be a part of the futurescape here in the UK.
Let's move specifically to the US. lots to talk about on that front. TPP, NAFTA, tariffs threatened 45% on China, 35% on Mexico during the campaign. Again, big picture, Jim, if the US takes the sort of protectionist approach that many fear it will, where does that leave the US and the rest of the world?
Well, I think for the rest of the world, what must be the fear is that this leads to a close down in what is the biggest import market there is. I mean, that's where final goods end up going, there and a number of other countries, including the UK, in this. So it's been an engine of growth for many people, and if it seizes up on trade, then they're not going to get those benefits, and that's going to be real, again, losses for them. So they should be quite unhappy about what's going on at the moment.
What happens with NAFTA now? What does NAFTA 2, if you like, look like, Alex?
Well, you look at when NAFTA was created, so 1993, right? It was before the internet. So a lot of the NAFTA legislation is not really applicable with the world that we live in now. So it does need to have a bit of a revamp, I think. Even when it looks at things like intellectual property, those laws have changed dramatically since then. If Trump were to eradicate it, which is one of the stances, like if we don't get a good deal, we're out. For Canada, they can fall back on the 1988 trade agreement that they had with the US as a protectionary measure. But for Mexico, it leaves a bit of a concern.
But
yeah,
one of the odd things in this is that actually NAFTA has been renegotiated, but it's called the TPP.
Yeah.
Because the TPP is actually made up of about 95%, and maybe a little less, US trade policy concerns. That's what it's about. What's also interesting is that the other 11 countries in TPP are still thinking about going ahead, even without the US. So maybe people are really thinking about alternative strategies here.
And let's actually, interesting you mentioned the other partners. Let's talk about this whether it's free trade or the globalization or high globalization. I find it interesting when Xi Jinping comes out and says he's for globalization, he's for free trade, just as the US is pulling back. Do we believe the Chinese that that's the way they want it to be?
I think if you look at all the major economies, deep down they have an interest in a rules-based multilateral system. There is a big debate about the shape of that, and I think there's a big debate about where it goes in the future, because free trade and investment rules need to be relevant, and there are a whole host of issues out there where the global rules-based system is behind the curve. In my industry, in services, way behind the curve compared to agriculture, manufactured goods, digital, IT, all of these sorts of issues. The rules-based system needs to catch up and remain relevant, and I think that's a really important point. The other point that I would make is that the business community, the global business community, remains foursquare behind trade liberalisation. The recent G20 engagement from the business community, which included the Americans, included the Chinese, included us from the United Kingdom, was really clear about the benefits and the efficacy of trade liberalisation and what it delivers to people in the real world.
Let's throw Bombardier in here as well. I mentioned at the top that decision. You know, I wonder first whether you feel it's the shape of things to come, or whether this is saber rattling on the part of the US. And two, and this point was made just before we came on air, we're getting very exorcised, it seems, about it now, but actually it's part of something that's been going on for a very long time in this industry, right?
Well, I think that's certainly true, particularly for commercial aircraft. The whole question of subsidies and what constitutes a subsidy has been a point of severe neuralgia on both sides of the Atlantic in particular in this. I mean, the Bombardier is an example. The other thing that's just worth picking up on is that since the financial crisis, the main action on trade measures has actually been on subsidies. There's been a growth in subsidies over time, and that's what's causing distortions to trade as much as anything. So yes, we will see a lot more of this.
You want to say something on this?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I think it's really important to look at the way that trade and investment has become a political football, and it ebbs and flows over time, but we are going through a period now where trade politics is heightened. From the business community's perspective, that's dangerous because that begins to undermine the basis upon which business is done and conducted, complex supply chains, complex value chains. That's the way that business works, and my industry, which services customers and clients, is concerned about the rise in trade politics.
Let's move to the UK specifically. We've mentioned Brexit already. How much do you think of the Brexit vote, Gary, and I'll start with you, the discontent with Europe had to do with disgruntled workers whose jobs were at risk by foreign imports, put at risk by foreign imports?
I think it's a really difficult job to dissect the result and to ascribe value or percentages to a whole range of things. I think the vote was about a whole range of factors. If you look at The Economist, for example, they have one view, other studies have come up with other perspectives. Yep. But at the heart of the matter was a decision by the British people. They've made that decision, and the key thing for the UK government, and indeed organisations like mine, the British business community, is to do what we can to address the challenges and pursue the opportunities.
Jim, how deluded do you think are Britain's hopes of a painless free trade deal?
Oh, well, I think fairly deluded in this context. It's not going to be easy. I mean, no trade deal is easy. We're unpacking an existing agreement which gives us the closest thing to free trade that we could get with our largest supplier and our largest export market. And that's a big loss. In where we're going, and the thought that somehow we can just wave a magic wand. I mean, the Prime Minister seems to think that we can negotiate a different customs union to the one we've got now and apply it in the 2 years immediately after March or April 2019. When we can't negotiate even three simple, relatively simple issues in the last 6 months that we've been negotiating.
Are we going to see the banks many banks, many people in the financial services industry relocate?
I think what all businesses are doing now, and my industry has been at the forefront of this, all businesses are looking at contingency plans because that's an essential part of what you have to do if you run a business. So you have to plan for the worst, but there's a strong hope for the best. So a lot of stickiness here to keep functionality in the UK. And the most important thing at the moment is to move towards a time-bound but legally secure transition period. Because that will give companies more time to consider where the end result will actually be. The other point, Axel, I'd make, which is really, really important, is I don't think often the EU27 realise the risk to them too of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
So the right Brexit deal is the right Brexit deal for the UK, the right Brexit deal for the EU27, and the right Brexit deal for global stability. We cannot be in a situation where European capital markets are fragmented, where customers and clients can't get the products and services that they need, and the end result is that functionality leaves Europe, broader Europe as a whole, and European competitiveness is undermined. That's a real danger for all of us.
Future of free trade is our final segment. I'd like to get all of your thoughts on this. I know we've touched on a bit of it here, but what 5 years down the road, actually let's say 10 years down the road, Jim, where will we be? Will this world be a more protectionist place?
Well, let's start at home. I think the first thing to say is that 10 years down the track, I think we will have something that looks like quite a liberal free trade area with the EU covering goods. And I think we will have filled in quite a few of the single market sectors where maybe finance, maybe business services and so on, and got more or less what we have now in those sectors, but it won't be as full a coverage as now. So we'll be a bit more protectionist in against our largest market, but nonetheless we will be closer to our leavings situation at that point. With the rest of the world, well, we could have anything up to 150 agreements to review at the very least over that time, with a lot of brave talk about grandfathering, so-called, from existing agreements we have through the EU with those countries. And I've been fairly loose with the term grandfathering in the past. It may be a little more complicated than I hoped, but it's less complicated than any other approach, like a full-blown new agreement.
And where does Gary? Let's get your final thoughts as well. And I've came to you on China before. Where does China fit into this? Where does the Silk Road, the Belt Road fit into this 10 years down the road?
Well, this is really about opportunity, and I think if you look at markets, the UK has to have effective links with developed, emerging and niche markets. We've been a long-term trading and investing nation. That isn't going to change. We are sophisticated, we are adaptable, and we are a beacon for trade liberalisation. And I think as I talk to ministers and representatives from overseas, there is actually a degree of excitement about the UK having an independent voice, because it does kickstart the debate about where we go globally on trade and investment issues. And from my perspective, as someone who spent all of his career in this sort of world, that's a really exciting development.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Alex Gorrie, Gary Campkin, and Jim Rollo, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.